Oh, sorry about that.
There
All right.
is Wi-Fi. If you want to go to your Wi-Fi settings and then I'll tell you, I can type in the password for you, but I don't want to say it out loud. Go to that one right there. Oops. Yeah, go to DC and I'll type it in for you. That way, I would give it to you verbally. But let me just say this. Okay, cool. All right, cool. You should be connected.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm ready to start any time.
Can everybody hear one another from the Zoom?
Let's do some checks real quick before we get started. Yesenia, can you kind of just say hi and wave real quick and make sure we can hear you?
Hi, everyone. I can hear just fine.
Okay, cool. And then when you're not talking, if you can please mute on your end. And then Kayla, if I'm saying your first name correctly, Kayla, can you wave and see if we can hear you?
Hello, yes, you got it correct. My name is Kayla Parkinson. I'm a reporter for the Journal in Cortez.
Cool. I'll reintroduce everybody on the panel here. Let's go ahead and get started. At this point, we're all good? Okay, cool. All right, well, for those of you watching at home, for those of you here, welcome to the Schooled in Secrecy panel hosted by the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. This is Sunshine Week as we talk about efforts in transparency in Colorado, both good and bad. And I want to say thank you to the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition for hosting this event and for all the tireless work that organization does, not only for journalists, but for citizens to open up opaque government in Colorado. In the meantime, before we begin here, make sure you can go to Colorado, the website coloradofoic.org to donate to this great organization. We also have a recently published Sunshine Guide for the state of Colorado's open meetings laws that you can access. This is a free guide that you can download. That way you can understand at home how your government should operate when it comes to open meetings laws. And then you can also follow CFOIC on Twitter. That handle is COFOIC on Twitter. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists joining us this evening. We have Mr. Robert Marshall with the tie here. He's an attorney in Highlands Ranch. Marshall is the plaintiff in a lawsuit that alleges 4 members of the Douglas County School Board met in secret and collectively decided to replace the district superintendent in violation of the open meetings law. Then we have Ms. Kendra Carberry. She's an attorney who represents numerous local governments in Colorado and advises them on sunshine law compliance. And then joining us via Zoom is Yesenia Robles, a Chalkbeat, Colorado reporter who covers Denver's suburban school districts. She works with a lot of sources in the school district system, and we can bet that she files a lot of records requests with school boards. So we'll get her take on that too. And then we have Kayla Parkinson, a Cortez Journal reporter who covers the Montezuma-Cortez School District. Recently in that area of Colorado, you had the superintendent was placed on leave, and there was no decision made at a public board meeting about that activity. So with school boards making news, especially as people take these political battles to the meetings, school boards have become the national focus as you see images of people angrily parading themselves before the podiums and yelling at school board members about masks and COVID restrictions. So let's get right into it. I think I'm going to start off with the first question, at least for myself, to get this going, to talk about generally transparency when it comes to school boards in Colorado. And I want to ask Yesenia Robles, as a reporter who works with trying to get information from school boards constantly, that is your main beat. What's the general feeling that you have when it comes to transparency with school boards in Colorado right now?
I would say that in Colorado, transparency varies very much, school district by school district, and also case by case. There are districts that maybe are sometimes really easy to work with, and then their administration changes and the people who were always complying and working with us maybe have left, and all of a sudden everything changes. That happens all the time. And yeah, there are some districts that are very diligent about responding to us, and other districts that are not so much.
Okay, great. And for those of you watching at home right now on Facebook, please plug in your questions on the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition Facebook Live page. Plug in questions, and I will ask your question to the panelists here. The next question I want to ask is to Kendra Carberry. You're an attorney who represents lots of government agencies here in Colorado. You advise them on open meetings laws. The question I have for you is, when someone is newly elected to a school board, from your experience, do they get any sort of training on what the open meetings laws are about? Do they get training on what they should and shouldn't do?
So I don't represent any school boards, but
Okay.
I will tell you that my clients who are municipalities generally and also special districts all get training on what the open meetings law is and the Open Records Act. So I would say yes, it could happen. If it doesn't happen, that's not a great idea, but yes, they should all get training.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. And let's go next to our next panelist, Robert Marshall. Robert Marshall, your lawsuit against the Douglas County School Board has made quite a bit of news, especially recently when the court issued an injunction against the school board that essentially found that members of the school board violated Colorado's open meetings laws when they met in secret to fire the superintendent. Talk about, Mr. Marshall, what compelled you to file this lawsuit, and how did you go about doing that?
Well, it was a brand new thing for me. Should I use this thing or?
Yeah, you can use the microphone. Yeah.
So it was a brand new issue to me. All I did is I've been paying attention real close to the Board of Education in Douglas County. And when the 3 minority members, they call them minority majority, but they should be 7 independent members doing everything. When 3 of the 7 called a meeting, I believe it was January 31, I went on and watched it, and I guess about 1,000 people watched it. They were supposed to have only like 200 slots for Zoom, and I watched it, and they gave a story about being told by these other members that they'd all had come to a decision to go ahead and get rid of the superintendent. And they had 4 votes to do it. That was my understanding. And my view on it at the time was, well, okay, they'll do it at the next regular scheduled meeting. Well, then on Thursday, that was a Monday. And then on Thursday, they had the massive Douglas County's teacher was sick out. And they had to close all the schools that day. And so at 5 o'clock that day, the president of the school board declared that called a meeting for the next day with like the minimum 24 hours. No public comment or anything. And I could see the writing on the wall that, yeah, you knew what they were going to do. They were obviously upset, in my view, that the teacher walked out. So they were going to go ahead and have a hissy fit and fire him immediately. So that night, I actually looked at the statute because everyone started saying, well, can somebody do something? And for the first time, I looked at it because I just assumed to have standing, I would have had to have been one of the board members or the like. And then I noticed anybody could bring a suit because it's protecting the public. So any individual who feels aggrieved by their public officials can go ahead and bring a lawsuit. So I didn't have to find a plaintiff. I've been in some other public interest actions lately, and it's always a pain to find a plaintiff. So I don't know how much inside baseball I can say after that, but I tried to track down 3 or 4 attorneys. I'm an attorney, but my license isn't active here in Colorado, so I had to have another attorney file for me or do it pro se. And there was no way I was going to be able to get everything filed pro se in time. Because at first I was going to just try and stop the hearing. We were trying to get a temporary restraining order. I contacted a bunch of people, but no one could help. And then an old guy friend that helped me with an issue a couple of years earlier, he said, I'm too busy. Will you do all the work and I'll just file it? And I said, well, okay. I should be careful what I say. He reviewed it and it was his, he reviewed it.
And before you continue, you say that you're an attorney in Douglas County. You're not licensed here in Colorado to file that lawsuit, but you had somebody file it for you. Do you have any kids in the school district, or you just file this as a citizen that wants open transparency for that school district?
No, a citizen. My daughter's 25, 26 now. So yeah, she's been out of Douglas County for quite a while. So I really hadn't noticed anything. I feel bad. Everything that happened in the Douglas County schools for like 8 years, I was oblivious to. And I just started getting interested this last fall and following it. Yeah, so this, he reviewed everything, did edits and everything and filed it. Unfortunately, I was hoping to have it filed by 1 o'clock. I started on it like at 8 in the morning. We were gonna get it by 1 to get the temporary restraining order, but we couldn't get it filed till about 3:50. And then the judge's clerk, the courthouse was having the same labor problems everyone was having. So it was a courtroom 5, and the courtroom 5 clerk was no longer there. They were using courtroom 6's clerk to take care of courtroom 5, but no one told us that. So we're calling courtroom 5's clerk trying to get it into the judge, and no one's answering. So then, we went to the hearing, and they had that complete cluster. And then after the end of that, they fired the superintendent, no public comment, just rammed it through. Admitted to everything there. Our entire injunction was basically just showing the judge that meeting. It's like, here, judge, look at this.
So as we continue on, you eventually are successful in court. The court issues a preliminary injunction against the school board. What does that injunction mean? What does that essentially say?
Well, right now, it's just basically told them comply with the law. And I even have the order right here because a couple of the school board members now are saying, it doesn't, you're mischaracterizing it. Some of the other school board members are saying, we need to just settle this. All the court's saying is follow the law. You can't break the law again by having these one-on-one meetings to come to a collective group meeting and a group understanding to take group action. That's just totally against the purpose. And that's something I love that the court said. Because everyone was like, well, they didn't break the letter of the law because they were meeting one-on-one. They may have broke the spirit, but they followed the letter of the law. The judge was right down the center and said, no, you broke the purpose of the law. You may have been following the letter, but you broke the very purpose. And he cited the very purpose of the first part of the statute. So, in the end of his, the last part of the order, he says right here, the requested relief is that the board do what the statute requires. So again, all that he's saying is follow the law.
And don't meet in secret. Follow
Exactly.
the law, don't meet in secret. Before we go on, I want to ask you this. There has been some talk among some of the board members to possibly appeal this court decision. Are you prepared to take them on in court if they do appeal?
Yeah, it's kind of just running up the bills. And actually, I feel more confident in the appellate courts than I did at the trial court. I was very confident with the judge there as a great judge, but since it was a brand new issue to Colorado law, I didn't know if a trial judge wanted to be the first one to slap someone down and say, that's wrong, illegal. I could have seen a reasonable judge possibly saying, this is new. I'm just going to find in your favor and kick it up to the appellate courts because they're supposed to deal with it. But the judge, the order is fantastic for anyone who wants to know anything about Colorado open meetings law. You just read, it's just 6 pages. You read it and it's just a complete, fantastic exposition of what's expected.
Yeah, great. And you can download that Sunshine booklet too on the website that we have on CFOIC right now too for another guy. Let's go to Kayla Parkinson in the Four Corners area. Kayla, you've been covering a case with the school board there where the superintendent was suddenly put on leave, and then something happened where the school board was just being absolutely coy and secretive. Describe what you've been covering, what you've been experiencing with transparency with that school board where you're at now.
Of course. So to start, I'll give a brief timeline just to bring you all up to speed. January 20th of this year, our newspaper began to receive tips that the superintendent was put on leave. There was no official announcement from the board. The following Monday, it was January 24th, the board president issued a letter, 3 sentences announcing that the superintendent was on paid administrative leave. And January 29th, that Saturday, the board issued another letter saying that the superintendent had formally resigned and it was due to philosophical differences of short and long-term goals between the board and the superintendent. So we actually published our latest report on that today. And a few key takeaways, we found out that the board president acted alone, at least initially, in asking for the superintendent's resignation in a January 18th executive session. meant to discuss a personnel matter regarding the superintendent's evaluations. At least one board member had no previous knowledge of that decision, and the Douglas County preliminary injunction is relevant here because the board used daisy chain, or those group one-on-one private messages, collective messages, to vote on terms of the superintendent's separation agreement and how those news releases I just mentioned were worded.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, great. Well, I have a question that's in our Facebook chat right now, Kayla, for you. If you can still hear us. What effect, this is from Mark on Facebook, or I'm sorry, let's go to Ron on Facebook, who's asking a question directly to you. Ron is asking, Kayla, as you were interviewing for the Journal, what were the comments from the local officials there?
I'm assuming he's referring to the board members.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. The board president did call me and let me know that the superintendent was put on paid administrative leave on January 24th. Beyond that, I've only talked with one other board member who said that he didn't know about the decision to ask for the superintendent's resignation in that executive session. Yeah, that's been my extent of communications. Another board member said in an email that he didn't think it was necessary to discuss the former superintendent.
I want to go to Yesenia now, who's been covering school boards here in the metro area. And this is a question from Mark on our Facebook page. And if you're watching on our Facebook page, please ask some questions away. We'd love to hear from you if you have some questions there. Yesenia, Mark is asking, what effect is the current climate caused by bullying parents and paid protesters trying to co-opt board meetings, having on boards trying to skirt open meetings laws?
It's hard to correlate exactly the two, but definitely we've seen school board members talking about how they've been harassed lately, and that does put them on edge, probably less interested in speaking publicly during meetings. But there's a lot of issues that just go way behind, way back. I think this issue is getting a lot of attention right now, and I'm glad. But part of the reason it's getting attention right now is because of the politics tied to it. But this has gone on for a long time. In Adams 14, in 2018, 2019, the superintendent also fired the superintendent, ended the contract at that time in a meeting that was on the agenda, just said superintendent contract addendum. They didn't discuss it. They voted unanimously without public comment, without anything. And then right as the meeting was ending, they said, we have to let you know something we just kind of passed. The superintendent's no longer with us. And then they wouldn't even provide a copy of that addendum that effectively ended that contract. So there are some issues now maybe that are making board members more wary, but some of these issues just go back way farther.
I see. I want to go back to Kendra now. Kendra, as we talk about transparency in local government, and we're hearing about these maneuvers by school board members to keep things secret and to keep their behavior secret. You don't represent any school districts, but if you did, if you did, what would your advice be to school boards like the Douglas County School Board?
Yeah, we got to stop using email.
Stop using
generally,
email?
just in generally.
Okay, why?
Because it seems to me, again, that this decision was made by email, perhaps, or by private conversations. I understand that sometimes we call it daisy chain, or some people call it Noah's Ark, right? 2x2x2. But I don't think that is really in the spirit of the open meetings law, and especially when it comes to an employee, because if you actually look at the open meetings law, there's a special provision in the open meetings law that says if an employee is going to be discussed in executive session, they actually have the ability to ask that it be done in public. So in this case, because this was never disclosed to anyone, the superintendent never had the ability to say, I want this to be discussed in public. So to me, this undermined the open meetings law in a number of ways, but I would not advise my client to do it. To be totally honest, I wouldn't advise my client to do it this way.
Yeah.
If we're gonna have this discussion, we're gonna have it in a proper, either executive session, which is allowed for personnel issues, but then the decision has to be made in public. So you can do it in executive session, have the discussion, but the decision has to be in public. And those two things have to go together. And here, it doesn't seem like there was either an executive session. Eventually, there was a public meeting, but that happened after the decision had been made. And that's not, I don't think that complies.
Could I break in real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the judge's order was clear that the formulation of public policy has to be
Right.
in the open. So discussions among the whole groups. And when you say, I tell my clients not to use email, that really sends my antenna up, because at least if people make a mistake and they accidentally CC a couple people, you have a record still.
Sure.
And you can see what they said, and I could forgive that all day long
Sure.
if we could see what they were talking about. But when things are done by the phone and they're making their daisy chain decisions to keep them hidden and secret, that's a big problem.
Can we talk about what a daisy chain reference is? What does that mean for people who are watching at home and don't know what that means?
Well, I guess there's really like three ways to describe it: the daisy chain, hub and spoke, and the walking quorum. But a daisy chain is basically one goes to one and tells them, hey, let's get rid of the superintendent. We don't like him. Go tell Mary. Okay, and then Dave goes over and tells Mary, hey, we're going to go get rid of the superintendent. Go tell Bill. Okay, he goes over and tells Bill, hey, Bill, we're all getting together. Already got Mary and Dave on board, and you'll make the fourth. We can get rid of the superintendent. All right, and then they go to a meeting saying, hey, four of us say he's gone. It's like, well, did we get to see the discussion and how you came to that decision? One really good, there was an Ohio case that was really good that had, for walking quorums, where they had a city council that would sit down, the city manager would talk to two at a time. They'd come into his office, sit down, they talk to him, then they'd leave. Two more would come in, they sit down, talk to him, they'd leave. Two more would come in. It was like giving the same information, coming to a decision just by breaking it up, with time rather than space.
Let's go back to Kendra. We have a question from our great attorney, Steve Zansberg, who's asking you, the Douglas County School Board did not use email to decide the 4 members to terminate Superintendent Corey Weiss. So there is no email record of their conversations. They did it, as we were talking about here, in daisy chain hub speaking series of phone calls. What would you advise any local public body regarding using phone conversations to relay one board member's views to a third and a fourth board member?
Again, I would advise my client that this entire discussion has to be, again, either in a properly convened executive session or in public. There are only, in my mind, there are only two choices here: a properly convened executive session to discuss personnel matters, and if that happens, you have to give the person who is the subject of that executive session the opportunity to have it in public, or in public. There are only two choices here. So I would not advise that my clients discuss this at all via email or phone. So, I mean, that's my, it's not, there's no reason to do it that way.
Okay, but we want them to discover it over emails. That way we can get those records eventually.
Well, I know what you're saying, but I don't want them to do it by email. I want them
We want them to do it.
I understand, because then you can like catch them in doing something wrong, but
Sure.
I don't want them doing it by email. That's not proper, right? And I tell my clients, please don't do this by email. Clearly by email, please don't do it at all, right? We want to do it in the proper form. And the forum is either, again, an executive session that's properly noticed that says we are discussing John Doe, and John Doe has decided he does not want this in public, or John Doe has decided he wants this in public, and therefore we're discussing it in public. Those are the only two options in my mind.
All right, Steve Zansberg has a follow-up question for you. Will you agree to advise Doug Cove Board of Education?
If they ask me, I'd be happy to help. There you go.
All right, let's continue on, and I want to talk with Ksenia again about her experience in navigating the waters of secrecy in school boards. Asenia, as a journalist who uses the open records law and open meetings law to get access to documents and to get access to meetings and such of that nature, have you had to change any of your tactics on your end to deal with some of the issues that we're talking about today?
The tactics, like I said, because some of these issues go back far enough, the tactics are kind of the same. It's just you do have to like employ them more. For example, during the pandemic, I've noticed that, when school boards decided to start having these meetings through Zoom, one of the things I noticed is sometimes they would post a meeting, agenda looked perfectly fine. Then if you happen to actually click on the link for the meeting that day, the link doesn't work. None of the public can actually get into the meeting. So it's always about asking questions, but that's something I always did before also, right? If a school board was having an executive session and they weren't actually disclosing what they were going to discuss in this executive session, it was always, asking, trying to get them to document what it was that they're actually going to be discussing that is protected by law that they could discuss in an executive session. Cora records, trying to get emails is something that's always really difficult to get because districts say, it costs so much money because it's a broad search, and then you have to play around with which words you request and ask for them to search. But yeah, some of the tactics are the same. It's just being more diligent about asking the school boards and the districts to document what they're doing all the time.
Okay. Let's go to Kayla back down in the Four Corners area. Kayla, when you were trying to pry information from the school board in that area, did you file, Dana Caulfield is asking, did you file any records requests with the school board? And if you did, if you could describe what their response was to those records requests.
Of course. So one records request I completed was that I requested the superintendent's evaluation, which was conducted by the board a few days before that executive session where the board president asked for her resignation, and mostly low marks on that evaluation. The board member I previously mentioned who said he didn't have any previous knowledge of that decision to ask for the superintendent's resignation said he believed that the superintendent's resignation was due to a poor evaluation and district liability, not the philosophical differences that were mentioned in that news release. And then I did request all board exchanges, emails, text messages in the month of January discussing the former superintendent. And I requested a separation agreement.
And when you requested that stuff, what was the response to that? Did you get the vast majority of what you asked for?
I did. I got everything I asked for. The board actually, or not the board, the district created a formal Cora request form shortly after my series of requests.
Okay, all right. Let's go back to Kendra here. Kendra, as you're hearing kind of people talk about these issues with how school board members behave, you represent municipalities, right?
Correct, yes.
Have you a lot of the things that we're talking about here, where we have people taking their political fights to school boards, and we've seen a little bit of that on the municipal level, and you're on the front lines of dealing with that. Have you been seeing any increased amount of threats coming to city officials or to people you represent in government because of COVID restrictions, pandemic-related restrictions?
That certainly happened during COVID. I think it's gone down now, but it did happen during COVID. There were a lot of disgruntled residents who wanted either to be in person or not to be in person either, so there was a lot of that, but I think it's kind of leveled off now.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we all struggle sometimes with the core requests specifically. Sometimes it's a huge burden on my clients. I'll just say it right now, on our staff, it's a huge burden. And so I think people have to remember that, especially during election season, we get more core requests than normal. And we have a town clerk's office, city clerk's office that has their job to do. And this is in their job, but it's also, it can be overwhelming. So I'm just giving this plug now that people have to realize how hard it is for town clerks and city clerks to deal with this level of core request. Again, I'm not talking about school boards. I don't represent school districts, but on the municipal side, it can be overwhelming. So.
Okay. And how would you suggest to people who are legitimately trying to get information from a government agency, how would you suggest to someone like a journalist or to a citizen to file a records request in a legitimate way where they're not harassing, they're not filing ad nauseum requests, but to get it in a way where they're going to be responded to and their records are going to be disclosed?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, go to the website, see what you can find on your own, right? So the less you give the town clerk to do or the city clerk to do, the better, right? So if you can go to the website on your own and find half of what you're looking for, great, please do that first. After that, give us specific timeframes. If you want emails, if you're really, really focused on emails or texts between elected officials, please give us a time frame between these 2 months or these 2 months or these 3 months or whatever. Don't tell us from here 10 years back. That's overwhelming to everyone. So I would say break it up and start little. Say we want, the last 2 years, and then if that doesn't satisfy what you're looking for, ask for more, but break it up a little bit so that we can handle it.
So you're not asking for the entire,
Right.
records retention file.
Right, seriously, and sometimes we get that. We want every single email sent by every single council member for the last 10 years, and we say, great, we can work on that, but it's going to take us a couple months to do that. So if you break it down to what you also, what I always do is I send a response back to the requester saying, what do you really want? Just tell me what you really want. If you really want an email showing that they are, friends with so-and-so or emailing so-and-so, tell us what you want. We can help you get it, but you can't, if you send a huge request that's really broad, we can't help you, right? So if you just tell us what you want, we want to help you.
Okay.
We want to give you what you want, but we can't have 40 staff members working on this.
Could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I found a practice maybe about 2 weeks ago in the Douglas County School District where I'd seen some chatter out on Facebook that people were saying, hey, blind copy the school board members and send it to yourself and they won't be subject to Quora. And then I found a couple, which is not true, but then, well, exactly. But then I found 2 emails where there was a school board member that blind copied some other school board members. And when I asked for those emails, they gave them to me, but there was no BCC line. The only reason I knew there were blind copied people is because he mentioned them. So I asked again and it came back the same way. So then I was very specific and said, I want the emails that went into the reception box for these BCCs. And then they came back and they got them and said they had to go through a couple extra steps. So for me, I thought they went to the server. I always did commercial litigation, that you'd go to the server and get them, which would show it. They weren't doing that. So anyone who was BCC'd on anything, you would never have gotten.
Okay, I'm not going to say that's perfect. I'm not going to be critical, but I think they probably should have gotten this. Sorry. But I mean, your IT department BCC should be included, right? So
that's not my IT.
I know. I didn't mean yours. I meant. Yes.
Let's talk about one of the issues that journalists are facing quite a bit these days, and attorneys, is the cost of records.
Sure.
Right. I believe Quora can charge us in the public about $33 per hour, which is far above the minimum wage for people to get access to records.
Sure.
And I'd like to hear from Asenia and Kayla too about this, what your experience is with this. But you, as someone who deals with these records, do you ever use that cost of records to jack up the price to discourage someone from getting records?
Absolutely not, and it's actually the opposite, because they pay me sometimes to review these records. I'm an outside counsel, so I bill them at my hourly rate, so they're paying far more.
But who's paying? The municipality's paying you,
Yes,
right? But you're not charging the citizen your hour.
No, I'm
Okay.
charging the municipalities,
wanna
so the
make sure.
municipalities pay my hourly rate,
Yeah.
which is $200 an hour average, I'll just say.
Okay.
So they're paying my hourly rate for me to review, again, only on certain records. Some things are really, they're getting out there, it doesn't matter, I don't need to review, but on some things, I need to review them and they're paying me. So they're actually, I don't mean losing money, but they're actually paying me more than it would be for the requester to pay. So I really honestly don't think that this is obstructionist. I don't think people are charging journalists or anyone else more than should be charged.
All right, I'd like to hear from Asenia. Asenia, have you been charged some pretty outrageous costs for records in your experience in filing records requests? And if so, if you can talk about that.
Recently, personally, I haven't been charged, luckily, but Chalkbee, some of my coworkers have been charged hundreds, thousands of dollars. And we always try to ask that if there's going to be a charge, right, that they let us know the charge before fulfilling the request. But there's been 1 or 2 times where that has not happened, and they give us the bill after the fact, and we didn't realize, we'd be committing to such a charge. One of the things that I always wonder when we get really high cost estimates is whether there's a disconnect between the person, maybe an attorney who's actually writing that response to me and giving me that estimate, and the person who is actually pulling that record. Because it seems like when we ask for details of like, why are you saying that would take you 30 hours? There's not always a great explanation. And sometimes that's when they adjust their rates when they realize maybe it won't take them that long, right?
Okay. What about you, Kayla? When you filed your records request with the school district there, did they charge you a lot of money or did they just give you the records?
The separation agreement and the evaluations I was just given. The more expansive request for all of the board's communications for the month of January regarding the former superintendent. Wait a second.
Mine's cracking their cello.
Sounds like somebody's playing something. Sorry about that,
Somebody's
Kayla.
practicing.
I think we heard a little bit of what you said. Let's go ahead and talk about some other questions that we're getting here on Facebook, and I think Kendra, you can answer some of these questions. Oh, you have a question from the audience.
Yes.
If you can kind of walk up here and stand up here, that'd be great. That way we can pick up your audio. Say who you are and where you're from, if you can.
So my name is Natalie Menton. I'm from Lakewood, Jefferson County. So I've got like 2 hats I wear. One is a great transparency advocate, long time running for government, but also I've been an elected official. So I've got both views. It's interesting for me with this. I've done a lot of chorus, and so I'm asking, and I didn't catch your name, so I'm sorry.
Kendra.
Kendra, yes.
Kendra, I'm sorry. I've done a lot of chorus, but I've never done one on text messages.
Mhm.
From your point of view, how would you then assemble that? Do you go get the mayor's cell phone, or what do you do? How do you assemble
That's a great
the
question.
document?
I'm going to repeat that question. That way people on can hear it. The question from Natalie is text messages. Are text messages disclosable? And as someone who gets those text messages, how do you go about getting those messages to disclose?
The answer is yes. If they exist, I'm just going to throw that out there. If they exist, they're disclosable. So typically what I would do is if I get a request for text messages from my elected officials, I will email all my elected officials or call them and say, I need all your text messages from day 1 to day whatever it is, right? And then they will send them all. They will usually screenshot them, and maybe not to me, maybe to the IT department. The IT department will put them all together in a file, and then we'll send them off. So yes, they are Again, I look at them to make sure there is nothing attorney-client privilege in there. That's usually the only reason they wouldn't be disclosable. If it's to me, if they text me, although I typically tell my clients don't text me. That's not how I do things.
I have a question about that. So you're essentially relying on the person who created the text message and who has the text message in their phone to be honest and pull that forward and give that to you.
Correct.
So if they did have a text message string where they're having a secret meeting at Applebee's while they're slinging back some margaritas and they're talking about that on text messages, they're not going to feel compelled to turn that over because they're essentially going to be turning over text messages that would show their violation of the law. So how can we expect the integrity of the disclosure of that text message chain to be true and accurate?
You have to trust your elected officials. I don't know what else to say, right? I mean, they're not supposed to be doing that. And if they do that, they're supposed to be turning them over. We have no ability, I have no ability as a town attorney, and no one else has an ability to seize people's phones, to call Google or.
But what about if it's a public government phone? Don't you have access to the government account to pull the text messages?
Perhaps, but again, we go back, there's the Tracy Baker case. I just talked about that, but yes,
Okay.
perhaps if they're, sorry, the Tracy Baker. Anyway, yes, if the texts are texts about public business and we can access them and they're on our phone, yes, perhaps we can. But mostly we're trusting our elected officials to disclose what they're doing for public business if they're using text.
Okay, I want to go, we're talking about the cost of the records and the cost of disclosure, and we've heard from Yesenia and Kayla. Robert, you decided to file this lawsuit on your own. How much, if you're willing to disclose, I mean, there's got to be a cost here. If you're willing to disclose, how much have you spent to initiate your lawsuit against the school district?
I'd rather not say.
Okay.
But we got some help, and I think the hard costs have been defrayed, which was, things that have to come up. And then at the end of the day, if you prevail, the prevailing party, the court has to award attorney fees. It's Colorado Supreme Court case, which actually said they want to encourage citizens to bring these cases. So there is no discretion to the trial court. You will award the attorney fees. So after finding all this stuff out, I'm seeing all sorts of fun that you can have with Cora and Como.
She probably isn't called fun, right?
Well, she's up in Superior, so
Anyway, yeah.
Okay. I want to go to some. We have another question. Kevin Vaughn, president of the Denver Press Club, has a question.
It's more of a statement.
The president is going to speak.
I've been at this longer than many of you have been alive. And I would say that my experience is, at the end of the day, it's the culture of the organization. You can always, the law is not going to make anybody do the right thing. It's great that the judge ruled the way he did in your suit. Congrats to you. But I don't know how you could ever prove that people were phone calling each other from their home phones or their personal cell phones one at a time. And they could go into a meeting and issue, somebody could say, you know what, I think the superintendent here is a bad dude. We're going to get rid of him. And each of them can say something about it. They've had their discussion. They can have their vote. I mean, I once filed an open records request in which the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department put the cost, Jeremy, at $1,072,000.
What?
I'm not making that up. I can show you the story. So the bottom line is some organizations have a culture of being transparent and they work with you. I had somebody today with a state agency tell me, basically the lawyer's saying we should charge you this, but I'm arguing we shouldn't charge you at all. You guys should just get this. That's great. But if people want to get around the rules, they can get around the rules. Bravo to Yesenia and Kayla and all of you that are fighting for open records because it's super important. And I guess my question is, you talked earlier about advising people what to do. I feel like there's two kinds of advice. One advice is don't do this stuff. And the other one was, don't put it in an email. Don't three of you go to Applebee's for dinner on a Friday night where everybody can see you.
Right.
And so it's like, how do you get the point across that doing the right thing is what the culture should be? That's my question.
I will say, I advise my clients to the letter of the law not to violate those. I mean, I am super conservative on this. This is why I'm here, right? So I advise my clients, don't do anything that you wouldn't do in public, right? We want to do all of this in public, right? There's no reason for you not to act in public. You're elected. This is why your constituents elected you. They want to see what you're going to do. So we need to do all of it in public. I can't say anything more than that, but trust me, my clients really get annoyed with me about how much of a stickler I am for this. But then when they see other government agencies get sued, they say, oh, okay, maybe you're not so bad. So anyway, that's my perspective on it. Is I'm super conservative about it. I think it should, conservative meaning that I think everything should be more transparent, not less.
All right, we've been talking about, the school board members, meeting in secret, and let's talk a little bit more about what the rules are, because I think Geraldine Gonzalez has a question on Facebook asking, what about board members meeting for coffee? Sometimes 2 board members or 1 or 2 board members meeting in a coffee house. What's the law there? Does the law kick in there?
No.
No, it's 3, right?
It's 3. I mean, again, if 2 are meeting about public business, then it may be an issue. But if 2 are meeting for coffee, go.
It's a quorum, isn't it?
It's a quorum,
Some
right? I'm
county
sorry.
commissions are only 3 people.
Okay,
so
you're right.
two
I'm
would be-
sorry. I said that on my municipal experience only, but you're right. It's a quorum. So you're right. If it's 2 of county commissioners, you're exactly correct. Then it's a problem. I was thinking about my own clients.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we're going to keep this going. We still have a good viewership. Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm Jeff Roberts. I'm the Executive Director of CFOIC. Thank you, everybody, for coming and participating. And I noticed there's some questions about Woodland Park
Yes.
on there. And it relates to how specific the agenda is supposed to be, or the notice is supposed to be. And I know about this because I was asked about this by a reporter a few days ago who did a story, KRDO in Colorado Springs. And so the Woodland Park School District had something on their agenda that just said housekeeping. And this was also in their notice. And what they, under housekeeping, it turns out, was adding a school to the school district. Pretty important thing.
Right, yes, I did read that.
And the
You forwarded that, yes.
forwarded for emails and found out that they had been discussing this for a while. And there's that 24 hours notice thing, and there's the Town of Marble versus Darien
Yep.
decision. How much has to be in that notice, and how specific does that have to be?
That's a good question. How specific do agendas have to be, and the notice of meetings have to be when it comes to topics?
I don't think that's enough. I'm not sure where to draw the line. I'm not sure housekeeping and adding a new school to the school district. I don't think that's enough. I advise my clients, if you know about it ahead of time, we got to put it on the agenda. Whatever it is, like if we're adding a new school district, put it on the agenda. If we're discussing whether to do something, put it on the agenda. It's not that hard, right? It's only 24 hours notice. So all we have to do is throw it on the agenda 24 hours before. It's not, and if it's, anyway, I don't think that complies. I don't know how else to say it. I don't want to throw them under the bus, but housekeeping, no, I don't think that's housekeeping.
Okay.
I might add up on it. Yeah, so we actually had that issue pop up just this last Friday in Douglas County when they had their school board meeting. They had a special meeting called, last second emergency one, 24 hours notice, 10 o'clock, and they posted an agenda item that they were basically going to have a resolution to give the president of the school board sole authority over the entire lawsuit to make decisions. There was a lot of pushback during the day. I sent some pointed emails, and then at 6 o'clock that night, a different resolution got added to the agenda. And so there were 2 resolutions, and the second one was just authorizing an appeal, with all the board members voting for it. Well, when they started the meeting, there were questions of, well, could you bring that second resolution in? And there was some argument over it, but the school council, I think, appropriately said, well, if it is not, you did not notice that one properly, you need to strike it. And they agreed that they had to strike it because to add it, you needed all 7 board members to concur, and all 7 did not. But Then when they started doing some amendments to the other one, the board president tried to rewrite it to exactly be that resolution. So, I mean, that was just stunning to me because you already voted that it was materially different and couldn't be added to the agenda. But now you're rewriting the resolution to be exactly what you just decided you can't add. So this is the kind of thing we're dealing with in Douglas County.
Speaking of Douglas County, continuing on that topic, and I want to ask you, Kendra, this question, and I know that you've been in the hot seat here a little bit
Here we go.
as a government
Thank you,
attorney.
Kendra.
So Corey Weiss has retained a law firm, and he has filed through his law firm a Cora request with the school board district, with the school board asking for substantial documents, and he made it pretty clear that he is going to initiate litigation against the Douglas County School Board.
Sure.
How much of a case does he have here?
Well, as you know, any decision made in violation of the open meetings law, I know that the order that came out, the order on the preliminary injunction didn't order this, but any decision made in violation of the open meetings law is invalid. So if that decision to terminate his employment was made in violation of open meetings law, it's not valid. So I think you may have a great claim. But to be honest, they could do it right and do it over and do it tomorrow, and they would have no claim. So again, I think it's a procedural claim, and the procedural claim is probably a good one. They could fix it. Put it this way, if my clients mess up, which sometimes they do, I tell them, just do it over. Please just do it over. Just go fix it. Like, let's fix it.
We're going to see a meeting pop up on Douglas County.
That's
We're watching this.
that's what I'm
We're going to see a
saying.
meeting sort of pop up tonight.
That's what I'm
Robert, you're going to have to file another injunction.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying he may have a great claim, but they could fix it.
Yeah.
I think they could fix it.
Interesting.
So,
That's an interesting legal take. Thanks.
Anyway, that's
Thanks.
Well, and that was actually one of the arguments they tried to make in Douglas County too, though, that they had all those discussions, came to the decision, actually had gone and given the ultimatum already to Mr. Wise.
Yep.
And then they had that meeting and they said they cured it. And the judge was very clear that, wait a minute, they came into court and testified that, oh, we hadn't had our minds made up. Well, the court found otherwise, despite what they testified to. And on top of it, he pointed out, well, yeah, and you had no public comment. He just went through it and it was like, yeah, this is probably not a proper cure. So.
What kind of response have you received since you started taking on the school board? Have you received any sort of interesting responses from, community members out there, any threats, anything of that nature directed towards you?
No, but I guess there was that one video CBS did and stuff. Some guy came up and got into an argument, but I have pretty high tolerance of risk. So, a lot of times people are like, oh, that was threatening. I was like, I didn't feel threatened. But no, I've had nothing directly threatening.
Let's go ahead and close this out because we're getting up on the 8 o'clock hour. I want to go back to Kayla and Yesenia, and we can start with Kayla first because you've been so patient, Kayla, there in the Four Corners area. Given your experience as a journalist dealing with the school board down there and trying to get information from the school board with the superintendent departure, what advice do you have as a journalist for someone trying to navigate these waters?
We're all here because we value transparency. And so for another journalist or anyone interested in the matter, I would say to be persistent. Definitely give whoever you're investigating the chance to explain themselves, and go ahead and file those Cora requests.
All right, thank you, Kayla. And Yesenia, what kind of lasting advice would you like to leave on the table here?
I guess I would put in a plug here for local news, right? Because so many of these things that we're talking about are so prevalent, and a lot of them are like in this gray area. I see a lot more cases than I'm able to write about of violations of laws. And so if we had in the state, right, more reporters who could pay attention to every single agenda, every single school board, watching the meetings for these things that pop up that weren't on the agenda, we'd have more transparency. For the public, I also would say that, we're here for you guys. If anyone wants to reach out, I'm always happy to talk through how to write a Cora, or, check with, what you might have missing, what is already available online. I've done that before, and I'm happy to help anybody else who needs it.
Great, cool. Robert, as someone who's taken on the school board with the lawsuit and has been successful, at least initially so far, any advice that you have given your short experience?
No, people should take it up more often, if there is a total violation, because it's wrong. And I guess one other little plug I'd make is my VFW post that I'm in. They're all a bunch of old Korean War and Vietnam War vets, and 2 of them have been on boards for years, one for like 20 years in Littleton. And they asked me, what the heck is going on down there? One of them said, I was on a board for 20 years and I never once spoke to any of the other members outside the board meeting. We only did it in public, and it was because of the Colorado Open Meeting Law. He said, that's just the way I operate. That's the way our board operated, because it all had to be done in public. So again, culture is the big thing.
And so, final word of advice from Kendra.
I think culture is important, and I think I'm going to be on the side of always advising my clients to be more transparent, within the boundaries of the law. But we do need more transparency, so I'm on your side on this one.
Great, cool. Well, thank you all for joining us. This evening we've got a great viewership here. And again, if you're watching from home, make sure you go to the Colorado FOIC website. Donate to that great cause. You can download the Sunshine Manual to understand the open meetings laws. And let's keep Colorado transparent by suing and asking
No,
for
that's not what I
requests. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Cool.
I see.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
We're still streaming if you want to turn on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good thing my fly's up.
Dana was.
I'm good to tell both of you. I'm aware of the charter school, that it's a public charter school, so there's subject to Florida and the Open Meetings Act. And they have the ability to push the button and send a notice to every family in their school. But when they decided to have a special meeting with the superintendent, they hung a notice on the front door of the school at 7 o'clock on a Saturday